it was easy back there. Or military family groups as well. Back in another state, I didn't have to file anything. It doesn't matter. Every state runs their own homeschool law, and that's actually good. Do you want to have a federal homeschool law? Do you want, by the way, you've heard all this talk about artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is not new. We've had it for decades. It's called Congress. But we do not want Congress writing homeschool laws. So the only other alternative is for every state to independently, autonomously, by its own sovereign power, write its own homeschool laws. So that's what we have. All right, yay, we're ready for that. And we're fighting to make sure that it stays that way. Because you don't want those folks in D.C. telling us how to do it. So, but if you do states, please find out your state's law. If you're a member of HSLDA, give us a call a week or two before. Now, if you're like some of these clever people, if you decide to buy an RV, go visit all 50 states over a year, you're special. But we can help you too. I've had HSLDA members in exactly that situation. I'm not going to explain it now. I have a few tricks, a few strategies, a few Jedi mind tricks, but we can help you out. If you can do that, it'll work, but talk to me first. Talk to Dr. Scott. I'll help you out. All right. Okay, so it's legal if you follow state homeschool law. Also, because a number of you are homeschooling, I'm going to be giving you a few content tips. I'm not a homeschool teacher myself right now. We do have 4 kids, all boys except for 3 girls. Most of them are homeschooled, and I'm going to be giving you some tips as we go along. Okay, there are 3 basic ways to homeschool in Virginia. I'll just kind of dash those by you, then I'll get down to the weeds on them. First, most common is notice of intent. Notice of intent, real fast, involves you file a piece of paper at the beginning of the year. At the end of the year, you file an assessment of your child's progress. That's the one. Second most common one is religious exemption. That is, you have a personal belief that if you put your kids in public school, you would be sinning against God. And if you say yes to that statement, then you're entitled to the religious exemption. You're out of it. Then you don't file any more papers as a general rule. You don't file an assessment. You're exempt. The third way, least common, is through the certified tutor statute. In that situation, you place your child under the tutelage of someone who has been acknowledged as a tutor in your county. It could be you. But that still comes under the broad heading we might refer to as homeschooling. So in Virginia, the phrase homeschooling isn't a phrase in the Virginia Code, but that's the name it's called everywhere in America. That's the common parlance name for all those things. Homeschooling. So we'll just call it homeschooling. Okay, here's your first content tip, and this is for grammar. What's the difference between a cat and a comma? Difference between a cat and a comma. See, no hands? A cat has claws at the end of its paws, and a comma has a pause at the end of its claws. There you go. So if you're going to file a notice of intent, you file this by August 15th every year, and when you file it, as of right now, you have to check one of 4 boxes. They're kind of like entrance requirements. And those 4 boxes, you have to check one. You can check more if you want. If you really want to confuse somebody sitting at a desk with fluorescent lights that blink and drive you crazy, you can check more, but preferably just one. Box number 1 is going to say that you have a high school diploma. Check that box, you're good to go, or higher. The second box is you have a teacher certificate from Virginia or New York State. That's the second box. Third box is that you'll provide a program of instruction that can be delivered in any way. That's a pretty easy one. And the fourth one is that you are capable of educating your children. That's one I tend to tell people to avoid, because school people get kind of confused on that. But have a high school diploma, you can provide a program of instruction. Now, if you want to know the history on that one, HSLDA, in partnership with the state homeschool group, we've been improving the state homeschool law for decades now. And if you roll the clock back, that option 3 formerly said, use a program approved by the State Department of Education. And we gradually got that changed to where now it just says, use a program that can be delivered in any way. Very easy. So, you have to check one of those boxes. Check more than one if you want. I'll help you out if it causes a little bit of flustering, but one at least. And then you are totally on your own. Interestingly enough, there are no required subjects. So you're under cognizance in terms of teaching your kids proper content. Then at the end of the year, you are required to submit a year-end assessment. That can be done a couple of ways. The most common one is through a standardized test. And if you submit a standardized test, then passing is 4th stay-9 or 23rd percentile on the composite. So, if your child scores way low in math, like I would have, you might say, there are only 3 kinds of lawyers in the world, those who are good with numbers and those who aren't. For me, I do low on math, pretty high in English. But as long as it averages out, statisticians would beat me over the head for saying average is the same as composite, but they're close enough for us. So, as long as the composite is 23rd percentile, 4th standard or higher, you're good to go. Another option is to submit a written evaluation by someone with a master's degree in an academic discipline. What is an academic discipline? Look it up. Any discipline taught in an academic setting. And there's a funny story behind that one too, which I will not tell you about right now. I'll just laugh about it privately to make you wish I had told you. But anybody with a master's degree or higher in an academic discipline can write a letter of evaluation. Now, I was dealing with an odd situation last week where a woman, I better not tell you where, but who has been doing academic evaluations of kids for decades and decades. Very qualified, very savvy, very experienced, but she doesn't have a master's degree. And she's been turning in these evaluations for decades and nobody gives her a headache about it. And all of a sudden, one county said, oh, we can't accept this. You don't have a master's degree. So we are in the middle of a somewhat awkward situation. But since she doesn't have a master's degree, she could go another route because another evaluation that you can submit is anything the superintendent is going to accept. So, if this lady talks to the superintendent and explains her credentials, explain her sterling background, explain her amazing abundant experience, you might say, okay, lady, you can do it. And I think he will. It'd be pretty hard to turn this lady down. And a fourth way is a report card from a college or a distance learning program, correspondence type program. Now, if that year-end assessment comes in too low, then you still have some options. First of all, if you're a member of HSLDA, call me and don't send in that low assessment until you talk to me first, because we may be able to do a workaround. But if you've already sent it in, you're probably going to get a letter back saying, because your child's score was low, your child is now on probation, and you have to submit a remediation plan for how you're going to do things differently if you want to be allowed to continue homeschooling. That's not a good situation to be in, because then they are in the driver's seat, and they can decide what an adequate remediation plan is. And you didn't really want them to be in the driver's seat. But if you end up there and you're a member of HSLDA, call me. I've helped families with that before. There are a number of subtleties to that. It has to be done the right way. Many times the schools don't do it the right way, so we have multiple points at which we can attack those vulnerabilities, but we can work around that. All right. When your child turns 18, you're exempt. Child's exempt. So at that point, you don't need to file any notice or anything. You can issue your child a high school diploma at the end of your homeschool program because you are your child's chief educational authority. Where do you think private schools get the authority to issue high school diplomas? Do you think there's a law that says private schools may issue high school diplomas? No, there is no such law. This is called an inherent power. Operating a high school program inherently brings with it the power to issue some kind of document to tell the world the child finished the program. That document's called a high school diploma. And this derives in some sense from the way our laws in America are structured, which is illustrated by contrasting it with Germany. In Germany, the principle is everything is forbidden, verboten, unless it's allowed. In America, it's the opposite. Everything is allowed unless forbidden. And so, since issuing a high school diploma is not forbidden to a private school or a homeschool program, it is allowed. It is a real high school diploma. And I'm frequently called upon to help kids get into college or get into jobs because someone says, oh, that's not a real high school diploma. I can't say we have 100% success on that, but I'd say we're somewhere in the mid to upper 90s. So very solid, very happy about that. In some states, like Texas, there are very specific statutory protections for homeschool diploma. Virginia doesn't have that, but Virginia has a pretty darn good track record of accepting those. So that's homeschooling with a notice of intent. And in that phrase, notice of intent, did you hear the word notice? Yeah, you couldn't avoid it. It's the first word. It's a notice. It's not a request. It's not you asking permission to homeschool. It's not you petitioning the government to be allowed to homeschool. It's not you asking the school board to do you a favor and let you homeschool. It's you giving them a notice, telling them you are doing it. Now, have you ever noticed those boring legal notices in the back of the paper that nobody ever reads? You skip over those to get to the comments. What makes those legal notices effective? They're published. Once they're published, they're effective. Does anybody have to read them to be effective? Does anybody have to do anything about them to be effective? Shake your head no. Okay, I know you're not asleep. No. Notice is unilateral. Unilateral. One person does it, boom, it's done. Now, unfortunately, many school divisions in Virginia have absorbed this myth that they have the power to approve you to homeschool. Not true. If they try to pull that one on you, you can gently point out to them that, oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry, Miss Outworthy. I did not request your approval. Please do not give me what I did not request. I gave you a notice. Thank you for acknowledging my notice. Okay, second content tip. This is on history. What do these three have in common? Alfred the Great, Ivan the Terrible, William the Conqueror. Same middle name. That's right. Very good. Perfect. Okay, now we will go on to religious exemption. Religious exemption is a fascinating history. Many of you all remember a very important Supreme Court case about 1972 called Wisconsin versus Yoder. Okay, some legal beagles know that, or freedom fighters. That's a case where Amish family wanted to exempt their sons from mandatory public education after 8th grade. They said, we don't need education after 8th grade. He's going to be, driving a plow and, working the farm the rest of his life. That's what we all do. The school said, not so fast. We have a law, and you must obey our law. So they got prosecuted for truancy and all the way to the Supreme Court. Supreme Court said the First Amendment rights of this community to exercise their faith trumps this public school mandatory law. And they were exempted. Several states then took that decision and codified it, and Virginia was one of them. And our religious exemption statute is the most robust codification of Wisconsin versus Yoder anywhere in the country. And it's very broad. It says, let me just read it to you so I'm not caught paraphrasing. Get my specs on here. A school board shall excuse from attendance at school any pupil who, together with his parents, by reason of bona fide religious training or belief, is conscientiously opposed to attendance at school. Period. Pretty short and sweet. If that sounds at all familiar, it's because it was borrowed from federal draft exemption law. There was one important change. Under the federal draft exemption law, it says, objects to military service by reason of training and belief. When then Senator Douglas Wilder filed his bill, he changed it to or. So the Virginia law exemption is based on training or belief, which gives us more flexibility. So, now, while the law is beautiful, simple, pretty darn clear, the process is not specified. It doesn't say how to do it doesn't say how to request it, it doesn't say how school boards should work it, and so over history, school boards have taken many, many different administrative approaches. When HSLDA first began helping families, almost every school board wanted a full-blown hearing. When I first came to HSLDA in 1998, I was still going to hearings before lawyers if the family wanted a religious exemption. Now, that was a huge waste of time, because they were granted almost every time. Almost every time, I'll say. And it cost the school board time and trouble and effort. And they eventually figured out, why are we doing this? We end up granting them all anyway. And so as time went on, we're down to very, very few school boards do anything like that. I say few, I say not none. I was helping a family get an exemption in Arlington County. And the two worst counties in Virginia in terms of flashpoints for bureaucrats encroaching on homeschool freedom, in my opinion, are Arlington County and the city of Alexandria. Way up there. So Arlington said, Scott, we're only going to give your lady an exemption if she comes in and submits to questioning before two members of the school board and the superintendent. Well, I conferred with my client, gave her some options, and there are options. And she said, okay, Scott, I'll do it. So I went with her, I prepped her before the hearing, I sat with her, I heard the questioning, and in the end, the exemption was granted. So that still happens sometimes. Is the exemption ever denied? Oddly enough, I just had one in Matthews County, way out on the necks. You guys are way up in the hills, but way over on the flat end of the state, they have the necks, these little peninsulas of land that go between the rivers. And it's very, very rural, kind of nice, but it's very rural. Anyway, Matthews County, a family applied for the exemption, and first time the school board wrote back and said, we're denying your exemption because you didn't tell us your children's names and you didn't tell us your children's educational status. So after that rejection, that guy applied to join HSLDA. So I said, all right, this is very interesting. I said, send them back another letter in which you give them your children's names, but don't address the education issue. So he did that. Then he got a second rejection. And they said, this time we are rejecting your request because you didn't tell us about the educational status of your children. Question for the audience. Was that a right or wrong decision for the school board to make?
Wrong.
What do you think?
Wrong.
Wrong? Why?
Because you told him what to do.
What?
Because you told the man what to do.
Okay, but why was it wrong for the school board to deny the exemption on the ground that the parent had not submitted educational status for his kids? Exactly, bingo, you get an honorary law degree for that answer. The exemption has nothing to do with educational status. It says, I'll read it again. This lady memorized it, but the rest of you did not, shame on you. The school board shall, and shall, as you know, is the legislative word of command.
Yes.
It doesn't say a school board may, it says a school board shall excuse from attendance at school any people who, together with his parents, by reason of bona fide religious training or belief, is conscientiously opposed to attendance at school. It doesn't say anything about educational status. So, I wrote a very pleasant, very courteous, lawyer-like letter to the school board, strongly encouraging them to revise their decision and telling them that if they didn't do it fairly quickly, we would have to take legal measures. So, in response to that, they called an emergency school board meeting, and in about a week he had his exemption. So, that happens, but I get the fun of coming in and helping it turn right. So, that's the religious exemption. It's, for folks in this audience, you're thinking, okay, I'm a Christian, I think I'd be sinning, but it doesn't relate to any particular kind of faith. Don't let this go out of this room. But I helped a family get a religious exemption, and their religion was Italian witchcraft. I'm still not sure what that is, but I know it's not Christianity. I helped another lady get a religious exemption, and her religion was earth worship. And that's not my faith, but that's hers. This statute isn't strictly for Christians, it's for anybody, because our nation and the Commonwealth especially really, really treasure people of religious faith. And the First Amendment is still very strong. And so if someone is that convinced they shouldn't put their kids in public school because of a faith conviction, we're going to protect that. It doesn't matter what their religion is. I've helped all flavors of Christianity, and as I said, many that are, very intentionally not Christian, but it's there. Another fun fact to know and tell, this religious exemption statute was enacted before anybody was talking about homeschooling. It was enacted before Virginia had a homeschool statute. So it's very interesting. It actually has seniority over the homeschool statute. Been on the books 40 plus years. It's done a great job. There have been a few court cases. HSLDA has handled a couple, but it's still there, bright, shining. It's never been amended except like to move a comma, like from here to there. But it's still hanging around. Okay, and the third one, the certified tutor statute, which also brings up our last content tip for today. You all know that 1,000 meters make a kilometer. You know that 1,000 grams make a kilogram. But do you know what 1,000 evangelists makes? 1 billigram. Okay, last homeschool option I want to talk about is the certified tutor statute. If it's you and you want to be the tutor, it's really simple. You take a copy of your teacher certificate, you send it to the superintendent and say, "Hi, I'm Mary Jo, I'm a licensed teacher. Here it is. It expires in 5 years. In 5 years, I'll ask to renew this, but for right now, I'll assume you approve me unless I hear otherwise from you." And you send that sort of mail to receive requested, and then if they don't guff about it, then you have been approved. Now, what you don't need to send them is the name of your kids. Because this certified tutor statute allows you to tutor anybody or nobody. You could ask for approval as a tutor and never teach anybody. Or you could ask for approval and in a couple of years teach somebody. So, if you do file paperwork for the tutor, keep it really simple. If you list your kids' names, it's going to confuse Miss Snoutworthy down at the office. So, do not list your kids' names. Now, if your kids are already in the system, like let's say you previously homeschooled under notice of intent, then you're going to have to massage it a bit. You may need my help, but it'll work out in the end. So that is the certified tutor option. And that is a rocket sled trip through the Virginia homeschool law. And now I'd like to pause because the most interesting part of this is always telling people what they want to know because they ask questions. So, does anyone have any questions? Yes, sir.
Is there a negative to, or what are the negatives to declaring a religious exemption?
Are there any negatives to declaring a religious exemption? Right now, there's a workaround, and the one is we got the law changed half a dozen years ago to require public schools to let notice of intent students take the PSAT and AP tests at the public school. We didn't put in religious exemption students. Now, many school people slide past that little distinction. If you just say you homeschool, they'll let you take the PSAT. But in Loudoun County, which is not as bad as Arlington or Alexandria, but they've gotten very persnickety. They recently turned down a couple of religious exemption families who wanted to take the PSAT. PSAT is important because it's the gateway to the National Merit Scholarship Program, which can give you, drumroll, free college for your kids. Guess how I afforded college for my first two kids? They scored really high on the PSAT, and their colleges gave them huge, huge scholarships. Very happy daddy. But if you can't take the PSAT, you have zero chance of getting that wonderful scholarship program. Now, the workaround is this. So let's say you ask to take the PSAT, and they say, oh, I'm sorry, you're under religious exemption. Like, okay, thanks. Next day, file a notice of intent. Poof. Sprinkled pixie dust on your kids. Now they are notice of intent kids. It can be done. Next question.
I've got a question.
Okay.
So we homeschool our daughter, and so do we need to send a notice of intent to the high school, to the school board? Because she's 17 and she'll be graduating probably when she's 17. So she won't be 18. So do we need to notify them, I guess, when we're done?
Okay, don't say your name, please, because you might be in the recording. You're homeschooling her right now. Have you done anything to comply with Virginia law?
Yeah.
What have you done?
Notice of intent, and we turned in the sheet to the...
Okay, so you filed the notice of intent.
Yeah.
And so tell me your question one more time.
So do we need to notify them when she's done? Like
When she's done.
when she's done with, because she's going to finish her high school probably in the next 6 or 7, 6
Okay,
months.
okay,
She won't be 18 yet when she goes to college.
great. Got it. Okay, so the question is, if the child finishes their high school before they turn 18, do they need to notify the local authorities? No. No. Now do issue your child a good-looking diploma, and do make a good-looking transcript. HSLDA sells diploma blanks approved by lawyers like moi. So get one of ours, or one that looks really, really good, because she's going to carry that with her the rest of her life. We want it to look right and say the right things. So once a child has a diploma, they're exempt. A child can get a diploma at 17, 16, 15, 14, 13. And once they have that bona fide diploma, they are out of compulsory attendance. Now, if you're challenged on that, like what if Ms. Snoutworthy says, well, I don't think your child has really graduated from high school, then an appropriate response to that is to send Ms. Snoutworthy her high school transcript of 4 years. And if it looks more or less like a high school transcript, this is not where they should back down. Because some kids, doggone it, are bright enough to finish high school by age 14. They really truly are. Not me, but they're out there. And if you can show a transcript of 4 years of real McCoy high school level work, I'll back you up on that. Now, you can notify your local people if you want, but it's not mandatory. Now, if they ask, why aren't you filing a notice of intent? You could say, oh, she graduated. So we're not trying to be cagey or coy. We're just not taking the lead on that if they don't ask.
Gotcha.
Okay, ma'am, you had a question.
Yeah, I just have a question, and maybe I misunderstood, but I understood that, we can issue diplomas for homeschoolers, but those might not be accepted at some colleges or even some public government jobs that they would accept that for hiring, and also for transferring. So if you homeschool in high school and then they transfer to a public school, the public school may not accept the transcript or all the credits unless they can prove by passing the SOL that they have actually achieved that credit.
So, do you have a question there, or just?
Yeah, is that correct? That
Okay.
that our credits, like if you're from a non-accredited public school or if you're homeschooling, that public schools may not accept your transfer credits.
Okay, let me take the last question first. Public schools are not obligated to accept any credits, and they routinely, as a general rule, don't accept transfer credits from the homeschool program. There may be exceptions, but they don't have to. So we tell people, let's say you're homeschooling your kids through 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th. By the time you get to 8th grade, you kind of need to decide if you're gonna go the whole way and do high school all the way until college. By the way, so his dad sends his son off to high school. Son comes back after the first break. Dad, guess what I learned? Pi r squared. Dad says, you fool, pi r round. But anyway, you need to decide before 9th grade if you're going to go the whole way. And if yes, go for it. If not, that's kind of your last chance to bail out.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of diplomas being accepted for jobs in college, like I said, we're up in the high 90s with acceptance rates. I'll tell you a few exceptions just so you be wary. With a high school diploma from Virginia, you cannot do nails and hair in New Jersey. You cannot be a cosmetologist in New Jersey with a homeschool diploma. Okay? There are a couple public colleges in California that will not accept a homeschool diploma. Now, what God-fearing parent would ever send their kids to California anyway? I don't know. There are a couple other oddball things. In Maryland, your kid might have a hard time getting into a law enforcement job with a high school diploma issued in a homeschool context. But the reason these stick out is that they're exceptions. So the thousands of success we have, it's like blah, 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 blah. Just thank you, God, but I gotta keep moving. So those don't come to my mind, but my failures rankle me all the time. And maybe one day, before I'm done with all this, we'll fix those. We'll see. So I think you have cause for a lot of optimism on that. In terms of federal law, there's a federal law regarding college financial aid, and I'm paraphrasing, that says if a child completes education through a homeschool program, they're qualified for financial aid. And that shuts down almost all the college admissions questions. Because, believe it or not, when colleges object to the high school program diploma from your homeschool program, it's because they're afraid your child can't get federal money. But I can send a letter and fix that very quickly. Another question. Yes, ma'am.
When you're getting the high school diploma and developing a transcript, do we have to follow an amount of credits that the public school requires in order for graduation? Like, is there a credit requirement or that kind of thing?
My question is, does my child have to earn the same number of high school credits to earn a diploma as kids in a public school would be required? The answer is no, because you're the principal and you get to decide. Now, having said that, bear in mind that it should look kind of like a high school transcript. It should kind of have about the same number of credits as a typical high school student would have. So, I mean, a lot of parents are getting diplomas after kids earn like 20, 24, 26, 28 credits. So homeschool parents are tending to overshoot on that. But you do a solid program, cover the basics, and they'll earn the credits they need, and the transcript will be fine. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. For the third option, you described the certified tutor option for homeschooling. Is a Virginia State teacher certificate the only way to become a certified tutor through that statute?
Yes, it is for that one. Now, for under notice of intent, it can be a license from any state. But for the tutor option, it has to be Virginia license. But it can be any kind of Virginia license. And like there are licenses that have like limitations or list subjects. That doesn't matter. As long as it's a Virginia license, you're good to be a tutor. Yes, sir.
When is accreditation important?
When is accreditation important?
Yeah. Whether it's for homeschool or private school, is there?
Well, accreditation is basically a mutual back scratching association. It's like, you compliment me, I'll compliment you, we'll all compliment each other together. I have a pretty low opinion of accreditation in general, now that I know what it's really about. There is no such thing as accrediting for typical homeschool programs, nor do we want there to be. We're not looking for somebody else to validate us. We're not asking somebody else to legitimize what we do. That's not what homeschooling is about. Homeschooling is independent, autonomous, self-regulating. We do it ourselves. It's parallel to private school, parallel to public school, but it's totally autonomous. Now, attending a private school where accreditation really is available can make a difference in some contexts. Attending a college that's accredited can make a difference in some contexts. Attending a professional school, being accredited can make a difference. But in the homeschool context, it's really kind of inconsequential, really, truly. Yes, ma'am.
In the late 90s, when I was looking for my kids to get into college, I asked a lot of questions, and actually it was amazing what I found out as far as what people thought about homeschoolers at that time. They felt like they were more focused, they were more prepared, they were more polite, and I think it's only grown. Is that what you have seen? I mean,
Right. So the comment is that when Ms. Trice was talking to college people a decade or two ago, they liked homeschoolers. They still do. Homeschoolers tend not to plug the drains in the bathroom. They tend not to, get drunk and fall off balconies. They tend to actually finish their diplomas. They tend to clear grades. Homeschoolers are welcome in just about every college, and they've done a very fine job. There are some colleges that have admissions counselors specifically for homeschoolers. Some colleges kind of go to lengths to attract homeschoolers. And why not? You've heard about the huge learning loss that occurred during COVID. Did you hear about any learning loss among homeschooled kids? No. It's not, and you're not going to find out, because unless I miss my mark, there wasn't any learning loss because homes weren't shut down. Families weren't shut down. And that's where homeschooling largely occurs. So I think colleges are going to continue to really, really like homeschoolers. And I think our kids who go there are going to continue to make a good name for themselves. Question, yes ma'am.
Back when we pursued religious exemption 18 years ago, we were counseled not to use religious exemption if we ever intended on using public schools in the future, because it would just weaken that exemption. Basically, you either have a conviction or you don't. Is that counsel that you would still give to anyone wanting to use the religious exemption?
Okay, the question is, she was counseled that she should not seek the religious exemption if she ever planned to put her kids in public school. Well, of course, religious exemption and public school are mutually exclusive, so they're kind of antithetical. Now, having said that, everyone has a right to put their kids in public school. So, is it legally possible for someone to have their kids religiously exempt and then put them in public school? Yes, it's possible. You have a right to put them in public school, even if you're under the exemption. Now, when you do that, the exemption for that child goes poof, because obviously it means your convictions have changed. Now, does it hurt the religious exemption if someone does that? I don't think so. People's convictions do change. You know, courts have acknowledged that faith beliefs are not stagnant. And since you mentioned it, at this hearing I recently attended in Arlington, one question the superintendent asked was, are there any circumstances under which you would put your kids back in public school? And I instructed my client to not answer that question. I said, sir, that is speculative and it's not relevant. I instruct my client to not answer that question. Because who knows? We don't know the future. We know what we believe today. We don't think it'll ever change. But change comes as a surprise, right? Things happen. So, and I didn't want my client to try to answer that either. And even though I told her, instructed her to not answer that question, the board granted her the exemption anyway. Because you don't have to defend what your beliefs will be 5 years from now to get the exemption. You have to defend what your beliefs are right now.
Mm-hmm.
Any other question about any of the ways to homeschool?
Here's one.
Yes, ma'am.
If a student has a learning disability, do you think it would be hard for her to basically get into the homeschooling program? A, and B, how is it far as when they say, is it a accredited program? What is the difference like, you know, as far as credits and so on?
Okay, the question is roughly, you know, what if a child has a learning disability, special needs student? You know, some kids learn slower than others. I have a daughter who learns way differently than just about anybody else. And if she were to ever hit 23% on any test, except personality, I'd be very surprised. On personality, she takes the cake. On imagination, top of her class. On spelling and math, oh my my. So, if you have a child in that category, then what you don't want to do is plan on turning in a standardized test. Just plan on turning in a letter evaluation from someone with a master's degree, or pursue religious exemption. And the letter from the person with the master's degree only needs to say that the child has achieved an adequate level of educational growth and progress. And every child can achieve that. It might be that a child who's 12 learns to add single-digit numbers. That might be adequate progress for that child. And that's all that matters with that letter evaluation. So for that child, line up somebody with a master's degree early on and say, hey, you know, at the end of the year, you know, would you review my child's work and write a letter of evaluation? But just kind of plan ahead. Yes, ma'am.
Can that person with a master's degree be the parent, or does it need to be someone else?
And the person with the master's degree be the parent? Yes. Yes. Yes, sir.
Earlier today, we heard about some alternatives that were homeschool, but they were not how I think of the traditional homeschool. Co-ops and in the direction of shared responsibilities. And seems to me, there's a continuum there between traditional homeschool and private school, all still God-centered. At what point might that type of hybrid or mixed model begin to be considered by the government, private school, and subject to all of the laws governing that?
Right. So, when I was growing up, there was only one telephone we could have. And you had to put your finger in a little dial and go. And the telephone company owned it. And we had to pay rent to use their phone.
Yeah.
And then AT&T got broken up. And we had the telecommunications revolution. Look at your phone now. What happened between the phone you had to rent and the cell phone in your pocket? Freedom happens. Freedom creates innovation. Freedom creates ferment. Freedom creates change. That is happening right now in the educational field. There used to be one telephone. It was called public schooling. Homeschooling has broken that wide open. A lot of ferment, a lot of innovation, a lot of change. The question was, at what point does a kind of organized program become a private school? I don't want to try to answer that in the abstract, because those questions, if a client were asking me that, I would ask 1,000 questions before I would actually issue my opinion. But I will say that the one thing that distinguishes a school is that it issues a high school diploma. For example, there are many supplemental programs out there for homeschool families, or co-ops, that may help teach a class, may help do activities, may do sports. They don't issue a diploma. They expect the parent will do that. But if a program actually issues a diploma at the end, that is one hallmark of a school. If a program does not issue a diploma, I would say, in my opinion, it's not a school. Now, would other people agree? I don't know. Does it depend on circumstances? Probably yes. So, broad question, interesting question. Without having a specific case before us, we can't really, truly answer that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My understanding is that charter schools accept some form of federal money for lunch programs or something. If you accept any form of federal money, does that obligate you to Title IX requirements?
Question is, if you accept federal money, does that obligate you to Title IX? Gee, I don't know. Next question. Yes, sir.
When I was homeschooled in Montgomery County, we did it under letter of intent, and we usually took the standardized tests. But I know that maybe when I was younger we didn't, and my mother submitted this sort of lengthy portfolio documenting the things we had done. Would that just have been a particular thing that was accepted by that school district, but it's not, because you didn't mention anything like that in the general laws about how to show your progress at the end of the year?
Okay, so the question is submitting a portfolio of the child's work instead of a standardized test. If you're leaning that way, talk to your local superintendent's point of contact beforehand and see if they're open to that. Because they could just say, I'm sorry, we don't accept any portfolios for year-end evaluations. Or they could say, oh yeah, we do that all the time. But it's really their decision to make. You can't require them even to look at your portfolio. So that's going to be on a jurisdiction by jurisdiction basis.
Thank you.
Any other question? Great. Well, I guess we've covered it at least well enough to answer the questions that can pop to your mind. Homeschool Legal Defense is a membership organization. The bulk of our funds to operate comes from people who join and pay an annual fee. It's roughly $120 a year. But there are over 100,000 people paying that every year. And that gives us the finances to run a very professional, very credible, very competent organization and have national and international impact. HSLDA only exists as long as we're supported by the homeschool community. So if you're not a member of HSLDA and you think this is a ministry that you want to be a part of, please consider joining. You can go to hslda.org and apply to join. And then as good things happen, as we see victories, you can kind of have the sense that you've helped other people. Because when we help a family say that has to go to court, they don't pay a dime more. We have spent the equivalent of hundreds of thousands of dollars on one court case. That family didn't pay a dime. But we had those resources because 100,000 families all over the country are annually putting in a little bit. So when the need arises, the funds are there. This morning, as I was driving up here, I had a call from a family in Missouri who had a social worker at their door questioning their homeschool program. And I could take the call and I could talk to the social worker because I was available to do that because 100,000 people are supporting me so I can take that phone call, so I can respond to that social worker. And at the end of the phone call, the social worker said, okay, I'm going to close my file. Now, what would have happened to that family if they couldn't have gotten a lawyer on the phone? I don't know. But if you wouldn't take out your own appendix, then you shouldn't handle your own social services investigation. So that's what HSLDA does. We love it. God's been blessing us, and as long as He blesses us, we'll be here to protect the right to homeschool. And I think that'll be for a long, long time because I think God is in this. And thank you very much. God bless you.